Welcome everybody to our second live learning for the year. We'll give you a second to jump in, orientate yourself. Gosh, we've got such a cool crew of humans. Great to see some familiar names jump in today. We are set for a very dynamic dialogue. I don't want to say that there could be a showdown in the next 45 minutes, but I'm intending to provoke a showdown at some point in the next 45 minutes. Let's get deep into the nitty-gritty around all things alternatives to assessment, micro-credentialing, learner profiling, capabilities, all of the things. Before we dig in, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we live, work, play, learn and create. For us at Future Anything, headquarters is on Yagara and Turrbal land in Meanjin in Brisbane, but I'd love to know where you are right now. So take a second, jump into the chat, introduce yourself, let us know what land you're on. And if you have a curious question or something that you would particularly love for us to dive into today, drop it in the chat because we'll be keeping a close eye on this conversation and making sure that we kind of cater to your every need. Basically, the moral to this story is if you don't ask, you don't get. So definitely ask the question and we will do our best to facilitate everything that you want out of the next 45 minutes as efficiently, effectively, and as engaging as we possibly can. While everybody introduces themselves, I might allow our two guests for live learning to introduce themselves too. One of my greatest fears in life is a bio read. It kind of makes me cringe inside when somebody reads my bio. There's a little part, it's kind of actually almost as embarrassing as when people sing happy birthday to you and you don't really know what to do with yourself for that 2 minutes. I feel like a bio read is very much the same thing. So I'm going to project my hatred of bio reads to my two guests and not subject them to the pain that I find and actually just give them a moment to introduce themselves. So I'd love to know two things. I'm interested in who you are and maybe what you do now, but I would also, if you would indulge me, love to know what you were like as a student at school. So if you could tell me a little bit about present you and what you're into. But I would be very curious to know that if you were sitting in my classroom as a young person, who would you be in that classroom? So Pip, I'm going to throw to you because I feel like maybe you might have given me a bit of chewed if you're in my classroom. I think,
you know, I probably wouldn't have been in your classroom because I was always truanting and riding my horse. So I was lucky enough to be in a school where I could have a horse with me. And I used to find any excuse to leave the boring classroom, unless it was my Japanese classroom. And then I was there fully engaged. Thankfully, I have nothing to do with horses anymore, not thankfully, but sadly. I am a deputy principal of strategic initiatives. I don't much go for titles, but that's my role at the moment. And I work across 6 schools in the Newcastle Hunter area to help them do cool stuff, I hope. Some days are cool, some days are not cool. And I am I think Japanese teaching is my base area, but I like to think of myself as a bit of a nerd. I like the technology things. I like to make sure that I'm creating an environment that helps students to prepare for their future, not sit and stagnate in our past.
I'm still back on the fact that you were at a school that you also had your horse at. And I feel like I need a little bit more clarity on where you went to school to mean that you had a horse with you. Because I'm imagining you, instead of sitting on a chair in a classroom, sitting on your horse while your teacher is teaching. So please indulge me.
It was a boarding school in Armidale in New South Wales. And part of that process was you had the option to bring your horse to school with you. And those in the know knew that that was a way to get out of school and go to different riding events on the weekend, right? So when you're at boarding school, it's a way to do it.
Noted. I feel like I'm learning so much already and I had no idea I was going to learn about this. Hassan, tell me about you. Who were you truanting school with your horse as a student? And tell me a little bit about what you do now as well.
Sure. So currently I'm acting in the Director of Education Services at the SACE board in South Australia. So nice to see some other SA colleagues online. I actually grew up in Victoria and went to a small northern suburbs school. I was actually there quite often. So I was, again, first in family to finish high school and go on to uni, from a refugee family. And I think partly that's driven a lot of the passion for my work in social justice today. And so I was not driven by my family at all to go to school. No one ever checked up on whether I was there or whether I did my homework or what my grades were. Mum never turned up to parent-teacher interviews. Not that she didn't care, she just was allowing me to look after myself, and I think I did that well. And so for me, navigating through that system as English is my second language and working through the mechanics of the system, I can see the different challenges and experiences from a range of perspectives. So I think it's really helped me frame and drive some of my passion in terms of the policy work I'm doing now. So excited about the conversation today.
Awesome. I'm going to stay with you. Disappointed that you didn't have a horse at school, but that's okay. Neither did I. So I feel like this is a safe space for us non-horse riders at school to share. I'm super curious. We're about to talk about capabilities. I think that's going to lean into learner profiles. That's no doubt going to lead to micro-credentials. That conversation then goes to assessment. The assessment conversation then goes to ATAR. Like we know the way that this conversation flows typically, but I want to start with a question that maybe we don't talk about enough. And I think we focus a little bit too much on the end without actually maybe having enough of a conversation about this. When we talk about capabilities, there is so much dilution in the language that we use to describe these things. So in some schools or systems, we call them future capabilities, enterprise skills, 21st century skills, soft skills. Gosh, have I got them all? Enterprise skills, whatever the new fandangled language is that we're using to describe these capabilities. As an English teacher, this concerns me because I feel like if we don't have the language that can connect us, we can't explain effectively what they are. And if we can't explain what they are, we can't teach them. If we can't teach them, we can't measure them. If we can't measure them, we can't do all the things that we want to do. So I want to start with this question. What do you mean when you and the SACE board talk about learning capabilities? What are you defining them as? How did you arrive at that decision? And then let's maybe start there. Like, how do we define these things? Is defining them important? Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. Tell us a little bit about that process for you guys.
Yeah, so it's an interesting conundrum. And in fact, we went over the exact opposite direction. So we decided they were called so many things, but everybody probably agreed they were the same things. And if we started thinking about what's the biggest risk to making this happen, was the terminology wasn't really a great big deal. And we could have argued forever about whether they were 5 Cs or 6 Rs or whatever they were. And so we decided really early that we weren't going to get into that debate and that we wanted to just define them to start with as behaviors so that we could try and see them as separate to skill sets, so we could separate them from knowledge and skills in subjects. That's why we even sort of pulled out literacy and numeracy, ICT, as not capabilities, because we didn't want to mix them up with being able to be tested or assessed through traditional modes of assessment. And so therefore, if we went for behaviours or skillful actions, then we would require other forms of assessment and other forms of evidence that we would value in order to be able to recognise teachers' observations of them. So the decision to go with behaviours was a hat for us to say, this is challenging and you can't do what you're currently doing. You have to do something different and it's going to be complex. We trust that teachers are professionals in terms of making judgments against standards. We trust that teachers have the professional vision to be able to notice a range of evidence that's observational, that's incidental, that's informal and non-formal. We want to recognise all of that in the judgment-making process when we get to recognising or assessing capabilities. When we went to deciding what those capabilities are, we really wanted to work with the base in terms of what was happening globally, in terms of the OECD 2030, their global competencies. We did a literature scan of what was going on, but we wanted to make them uniquely South Australian. So we did work with Melbourne Uni's ARC in terms of the complexity of developing complex constructs and frameworks, but we wanted to work with our local schools. So we worked with teachers and leaders in schools about what were the successful qualities, dispositions and behaviours that young people that were successfully navigating through school, not necessarily in the traditional sense, what qualities were they showing? Then we went to our university and tertiary pathways and said, what are the qualities or dispositions that graduates are showing that show high retention and completion and GPA? What are those things? And we also then went to industry, right from across from our South Australian skills industry to each of the industry skills councils, and said, think about the employability skills, but from an employer of a small franchise or a big business, again, what are those same qualities and behaviours that your recent graduates are showing that make them really successful in terms of navigating through their first year of post-school employment? And so we started to generate over 500 data points of what those look like, thematically, analyze them, brought them together into what arrived at our 5 capabilities and then the 40 odd elements or dimensions that were underlying them. So that's where we're at right now. And they seem to be working with the schools we went through in our first pilot. And no one's really arguing or kicking up a stink about what they're called or what the elements are. So we're pretty comfortable where we've landed them to get into the more complex part of how do we assess them and allow room for them in our curriculum and our teaching and learning.
Cool. I want to stay there for 1 second, and then Pip, I'm going to throw to you. Like, for those that are not familiar with what you've led with SACE, so when you say the pilot with your schools around those capabilities, what did that look like? What does that look like on the ground in the schools thus far?
Cool. So what we did probably 2 years ago was try and really shift the way that the SACE board as a senior secondary jurisdiction works with their community. And we wanted to move away from having the authority to make policy and decisions, which is the assumption that all the best expertise sits in the authority. And we're saying, look, I haven't been in the classroom for 15 years. I've got the luxury of doing some policy work, but our teachers are best placed to really help us make decisions about what we move forward and how this might relate to implementation in the system. So we established what we called the SACE Change Network, which was schools and teachers that were happy to play with us in a SACE beta, so to speak, and test and prototype some really risky assumptions and ideas about how this would play out. And so then what we did is once we onboarded those 30 odd schools, particularly for a learner profile pilot, then we went through a series of activities where we develop prototypes, and one of them might be the visualization. I know Pip might show you a range of ways we might visualize a learner profile, but we tested some of those and see what people thought and how they reacted. And we tested them with employers as well as with industry and with students. And we tested what it looks like in your teaching and learning program. Do our current subjects have affordances for these capabilities, or can we see them in there? And so what we did through an iterative process is raise some really big questions. Do we trust the teacher reliability? Can teachers actually assess something that's so subjective? And we started working through those processes to give confidence to not only our community, but our board and our standing committees to say, this is what we're learning so far. So we're going through a phased iterative process of testing the really biggest risks to realizing our ambition, to recognize a holistic view of student learning and really shift how we measure and see student achievement, and taking that through our pilots through that process. So we've gone through one pilot, just gone through one evaluation, and we're just about to propose what a second pilot in 2023 looks like.
Awesome, thank you. Pip, I want to dig in with you. So we've heard a little bit about what the SACE board is leading, some of the pre-work that went into informing the pilot, and obviously where they're going to next. Can we dig a little bit further into your work, and maybe can you share with us some frameworks? Like, you tell us a little bit of the story, and I know you and I are on the same page around, like, let's talk practicalities. What does it look like on the ground? How do you define the capabilities? How did you arrive at these definitions? What does it look like for teachers and schools?
No problems. I'm going to just give you my very, very snippet of how I explain a capability to the universe. And it's, for me, it's the ultimate endpoint is that students know what their magic power is when they leave school. So instead of just knowing what a grade is, they know what their magic power is. And that can be anything. And I truly believe, and I'm going to show you how these magic powers, they're contextual to the schools and the environment. So like Hassan just said, each school and each community has its own context of what makes success in that community. And so I think this is what capabilities are, because at the moment our syllabuses are about standardizing people. So I'm going to show you a couple of different varieties of learner profiles that I've come across and that have inspired the work I do, and then show you a couple that I've created for my schools. So The big picture international learner profile is one that we've all seen around the place these days. And this one has what's called a chrysanthemum in the middle, and it maps students around their chosen capabilities. The MTC transcript, which Jen might share the link for this, is another place that you can get a little bit of an inspiration about what a learner profile might look like. And then we start working with our own learner profiles. So for me, this is one we've built that replaces a school report for students. And you can see we've chosen in the middle. So these are big picture students who are not yet working towards the learner profile level, but we want them to be able to have a learner profile that they can take out to their internships. So we've mapped some of the employability skills to the frameworks that sit underneath the big picture learner profile design, and we've mapped to that. And we also link to a digital portfolio, a 2-page advisor reference on the students, and we have the students write about themselves and also share some of the things that they've done while they've been at school and what their projects have been during the big picture world. So this, I create all my stuff in a free tool called Google Data Studio. And the back end of these are literally spreadsheets that we then surface. So for me, a perfect profile is a jagged profile, because no student is ever perfect. No human is ever perfect. And we should all just get used to that and know where our magic powers lie, rather than be trying to be perfect at everything. So this, you can see in this profile here, we have our employability skills. Now, we've worked with our community around Hunter Sports High School to define what they see success is, and they've been part of the development of this profile. And we have down the bottom here, these are Credly micro credentials. So any student who, you can see here, this student has their learner permit and their first aid permit, and also is doing a certificate 3 in early childhood education. So the reason we decided to use Credly micro-credentialing here is because these link through to LinkedIn profiles, and students can actually see real legit jobs in SEEK that give them, you know, $50,000 if they work at them. So they can straight away see a link between things they're doing at school and the work they might like to do out in the workforce. And we also link their professional experience in here, as well as attendance. Interestingly, employers don't care about attendance. We do, but they don't. So that's been a lovely area to chat with. So our graduate profile shows micro credentials, it shows their capabilities, and it links off to an e-portfolio of evidence of how we've come to that. So how do we actually do this stuff? So we have some frameworks. I like this structure that the big picture frameworks come with. And so something like this is how you can get started. This looks really scary, but it's not. It's, you know, those pesky little Australian general capabilities frameworks that have been floating around for 10 years now. Maybe not 10 years, I can't remember. This is the personal and social capabilities. And you can see you can create a wheel, whatever works for you, whatever shape, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter as long as it's clear to show where the strengths are. And you can create something around self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. You don't need to create a profile on every single capability. You can create a profile on 1 or 2 capabilities. And that's what we're starting to do at Hunter Sports now. We've got our big profile, but for some of our different academies within the school, we're narrowing it down to say just the personal and social capabilities, or just the problem-solving capabilities. So to me, having yourself a framework like this is the base that sits underneath the Hunter Sports profile. Having your own framework, I use this one because I came across it through my work with Numetrics and also with Big Picture, and working with a team to create what works for you, and that being the base that sits underneath your graphic visualization. Then we decided to map those general capabilities to the employability skills that were listed in the 2020 Senior Pathways, blah, blah, big words, federal report. So we mapped against that, and that's what the local community liked, the words of this rather than the words of the ATAR general capabilities. So that's why we went to that. So these around the outside here are those words from the employability skills. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts, I guess. We've got our frameworks, And we are generally massaging teachers to make judgments based on evidence. And we're moving to a new structure that I might chat about later. I'll just stop sharing for now.
Thanks, Pip. That's awesome. I want to probably throw this to both of you in the work that you're doing, because there's a couple of really interesting perspectives that I'm super curious about when it comes to these. The first question that I want to throw to both of you is, this feels like it's more work for teachers. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Okay, if I still have to do all of my assessment that I've been asked to do, then I also now need to report on 40 different domains that sit under capabilities, etc. The educators in the room are going, man, I don't have time for this. So can we talk to this? Like, how does this address the teacher workload issue that we know is really huge? Like, I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I know the capabilities are important. I'm committed to this, but I'm also time poor. How does this work with implementation on the ground for your educators? And Pip, maybe I'll start with you, and then Hassan, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Sure, I might actually then just share my screen again. So to me, it doesn't impact on the teachers at all, because when we're doing this right, when we're actually focusing on learner capabilities, we're focusing on learner agency. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Don't click, Pip. So to me, the sort of workflow where we would implement learner profiles, to me, or general capabilities, is students choosing a capability that they're going to focus on and work on for the term or the semester. Then we do the work in the classroom, like we're doing the work in the classroom. We might explain to them through the framework what evidence might look like to show development in that area. The students are going to do the work and capture the evidence in a portfolio, do some reflective writing. And then when we come back for a second discussion with them, they're going to show evidence of where they've grown in that capability area. So to me, if we really want students to be exploring their own magicness, then they need to be doing the work, not the teachers. And when we do this, it kind of shuffles teachers forwards a little bit to maybe offer opportunities for students to do the growth, but we're not putting the work with them, because when we do that, it's a really scary thing. So to me, it's about students defining where they want to grow, gathering evidence, reflecting on that evidence, and then sharing that evidence back to a significant mentor or person in the school environment, who then records that growth.
Awesome, thanks, Pip. Hassan, I'll throw to you. What does this look like for teachers on the ground?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Pip that a strong driver and a foundational principle is the student agency in this process, and they've got to have the opportunity and the rights to share the information they want to, and to share the capabilities and the experiences they want to. But from a system perspective, and right across South Australia, Northern Territory, we're really conscious of the equity gap for some students. Look, I strongly believe all students are born with and have agency, but for whatever reason, in terms of institutionalization, personal trauma, life experiences, that it's taken away from them. And sometimes some of the things they experience and the learning they have developed might not be perceived as being valuable. So therefore, why should I tell you I'm the primary care of an older parent, or that on the weekends I do this volunteering for whatever? Because currently the system hasn't valued that. And I don't even want to share that with you. I don't trust that with you, let alone whether you're interested in it. So we need to try and incorporate some system-wide policy and levers to ensure that we want a strong drive from student agency sharing the learning that they've developed through the avenues and experiences they've had. But how can we incorporate policy levers as well? And so what we're doing, what we've heard, is that we've got an overcrowded curriculum. So essentially the SACE has asked us to do too much assessment and cover too much content that's required. And so if we want to have deeper and richer learning, what are you going to take away from that? And so those that have bought into the Kool-Aid can clearly say, this is what I wanted to be a teacher for, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'd love to do with most of my time. I want to share my deep discipline knowledge and develop student capabilities, but you're not letting me. And so one of our clear directions is to start looking at where we could try and minimize the over-assessment in our SACE and minimize the content level. But the clear challenge we've got is some of those in the community that say, once you do that, you're dumbing down the curriculum. And so our biggest challenge and our biggest barrier will be other teachers from some of those discipline areas that say you can't take away this assessment, you can't take away that content, because the kids need to know that. Of course, they need to know everything. So it's a real challenge for us about how we go through that process of really sharpening our focus of our curriculum and assessment to what's important, and allowing room for deeper, richer learning. And so rather than covering ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and ancient Italy, can we just go with ancient Rome for 8 weeks and do that really well and allow room for deep capability development rather than rushing through all three of them and doing none of it really well? So I guess it's a challenge for us, student agency, but a strong commitment to minimizing an assessment and content curriculum, but doing that at the pace and comfort level that our community allows us to move.
And I would also argue, I think, if we're like, where's the student agency in that curriculum journey? Like, if we have to do an ancient thing, can't the students choose the ancient thing? And then we've actually built the agency. I want to kind of speak to something, the second question that comes out of this every time I lead a dialogue that's connected to anything that we're talking about. After we talk about workload, the second conversation is, but it doesn't really count because all that matters is the ATAR. And so I want to really name this, right? And I think it's really important because, again, those of us that have drunk the Kool-Aid know that only 1 in 3 young people use their ATAR to get into any pathway that they want post-school. So we get the stats, and yet the broader community still place value on ATAR as a performance indicator for the quality of a school. And this isn't helped when at the end of every year, every single principal on every single social media platform projects forward the number of, top ATARs that their school received. So the narrative is there, not only it's from the schools into the community, and the community's bought into it, and so the students have it. And so if we've got this, yes, capabilities are really critical, we think this is really important, but if I'm, as a young person, going to allocate my time and resources to either building capabilities or getting a really good ATAR, well, this e-portfolio is great, but really what counts is that number that I get at the end of my senior schooling journey. So it's all good and well for the SACE board to be investing in, and I'm being the, I want to be say the hard questions. This framework is great and I believe in it. And then how do we marry that up against the expectations around ATAR when it comes to the senior schooling space? And maybe Hassan, I'll start with you, and then Pip, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. So our primary driver, and we keep saying, I'll use Pip's words, the reason we're doing this is to allow every young person to understand what their superpower is, because in the model you talked about, if there's 1/3 of people who get a successful buzz at the end of year 12 because of that metric we've got, but the other 66% of kids get nothing. And we need to show them that they're worth something, that they've got some value, they've developed 13 years of amazing skills and talents just for getting over the line and working through that resilience to finish that. So that's the first driver, that it's young people seeing themselves as successful for themselves and not dominated by the current, media narrative that's there. So that's one thing. The second reason is that we're acutely aware of that challenge. So therefore, we've been driving a system-wide solution that we can't do this on our own. There's no point developing a tool or a metric that only we use, and it has no currency, portability, or utility for young people. So at the very start of our journey 2 years ago, the first thing we did was engage industry in part of this process and engage tertiary institutions. So we've got our Tertiary Admissions Centre, so SATAC, similar to UTAC and BTAC, on board with us, that part of the conversation, as well as the Admissions Centre of our 3 universities in South Australia and Charles Darwin Uni in the NT, and starting them getting part of the conversation. So they're part of our advocates and part of our sponsors to say, we are also committed to come part of this journey. We know the ATAR provides some value, but it doesn't provide a really strong narrative in terms of a predictor of success for the range of students. So our goals are, there's some amazing kids out there that you'll never see, that will be awesome at your unis and awesome in those professions that you'll never have access to, that they don't consider they're worthwhile, and you can't see them because they don't exist on your radar. So how can we, one, offer you a platform to see those kids that you've never seen before? And 2, how can we provide a better matching process to say, what capabilities do engineers at Flinders University really want? What capabilities do they show? And how can we match those with the kids? And so what we're shifting the narrative to is, rather than a ranking system, to a better matching system. And so therefore students are choosing pathways that they're really passionate about and they're set up for. And universities are taking on people that they know are well suited because of the capability that they've developed. And if they see that trajectory over 2 or 3 years' time, they can see that their past performance is a really good indicator of future performance. So these are the sort of kids I want in my course and I want in my uni. And so that's the way we're trying to grapple with that and have that conversation together as a system rather than driving that narrative ourselves.
I love the idea, Pip, of, you know, the jagged graph, the spider graphs that you've got. Imagine if you could see exemplars from professions around how they sit across those capabilities, and young people could see what theirs looks like, and then look at an engineer that's 4 years deep and then be able to overlay the two over each other and go, oh gosh, these are the areas that I need to work on if I want to get there, because these are the gaps that exist. Like, there's something really powerful in taking that matching concept, Hassan, and then providing that really tangible visual evidence so that young people can project themselves forward into the chosen pathway. So yeah, I'll throw to you. Tell me about this, because it's the question on everyone's lips after we wrap our heads around the other parts. It's always, so it's workload first, and then it's, but the ATAR, you know, this is all fine and well for middle school, but we can't do this in the senior school.
I guess I see it, 2 stories to tell for this part is I see it in an area, a socioeconomic area where not many students will go to university. So I always drive into the moral imperative, as Hassan said, to have our students leave school with something in their hands. Like, do you remember when, I don't know how old you are, so apologies if this is like way older than you, but when we left school in year 12, I was so excited to finish school and head into the next part of my journey, right? It was like, yes, school's finished. I'm going to go and do whatever I want. I feel we've sucked that out of our kids. So, and they're kind of, if we can help them to understand their magic powers when they leave, then that is way better than any number or any grade that is given to them as they walk out of the door at, 8 a.m. on the 17th of December with a sausage sandwich in their hand. The moral imperative is to make sure they know who they are. And my story around this is my own daughter, who's now 22. And when she was in year 11, she came to me and she said, Mom, I don't want to go to uni. So why am I at school? I'm like, oh, whoa up. We're going to have to think about this one. And I did. And I came back and went, fair enough, but you're going to have to keep learning in life. So let's keep learning. I wish she would have had something at that stage to show her, like, I knew where she was going to head, but I wish she had something to see that and understand where her strengths were so that she could be confident to leave school and make decisions around her next learning journey that was positive for her. So that, I think, is what we need to do for every single student. So basically what I'm saying is the ATAR is still there, but I'm ignoring it. And those who need the ATAR will continue to use it, but it's sort of like a narcissistic white elephant in the back of the room that I just leave it to be. And I focus on doing what I can do. And what I can do is remind people of the magic powers that every student has. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. There's many thoughts that I've had off the back of that. One of them was, is it called a sausage sandwich or a sausage sizzle? I think that's really important that we clarify as a point number one. The second element that I'll dig into is I reflected back on finishing school for me and had that, just put myself back in that place. And you're right. I think, where's the zest at the end of that school journey? And this phrase that I stumbled in recently around the notion of hope hunters. And so, I wanted to know, how do we build a school full of hope hunters, which are young people that have this possibility mindset, that look at the world in front of them and think, gosh, I could go anywhere. And I think maybe one of our challenges in the education system is we're constantly narrowing their focus. So when they leave, they don't realize that actually there's a world in front of them and that there is so many possibilities for them to take, and that transferability of skills, the narrative around, gosh, if you're good at this, you can actually do all of these things, rather than, I think, what we do through schooling is we constantly put the blinkers further and further down. And so young people struggle to see that. And look, I think this is part of a bigger conversation around what does a really great career readiness program look like for young people, and why does the conversation about jobs and pathways happen at year 10 when they need to pick senior subjects? I mean, there's no ability for young people to take risk or to look at possibility when it's laden with this high pressure situation where they're choosing for the rest of their lives. And so I'll call to like some of the work of the Greater Whitsunday Alliance up in the Mackay, Isaac and Whitsunday region that we've partnered with, and they've actually developed a career education program that starts from year 7 all the way through to year 10. So there's like 10 lessons a year in each of those year levels, and the first year 7 unit culminates in the students presenting a physical bucket of careers and pathways that they find exciting and interesting. And then over the course of the 3 years, they start to prototype and play with the possibility that sits in that bucket. And so we get them excited about pathways. We get them like looking at totally weird and random jobs that you never knew existed, so that instead of focusing on engineering, health, law, teaching, they're able to see, you know, all of the things that exist beyond that, which I think is a really interesting conversation to have. I want to dig into something and just share some data that we have from one of our programs really briefly, because I want to dig into the student voice part of this. At the beginning of our Activate program, we pre-test all of our young people on their confidence across 6 key capabilities that we look at. And these are the 6 capabilities. And this was the capture of the confidence levels in last year's participants in our Activate program. So we had about 5,000 young people. And what's really fascinating to me is it doesn't matter what state or system I'm working with, creativity and innovation is the lowest capability across the board every time. But potentially where I want to leap to next is when we look at this data, because we take the same capture of educators and we look at their confidence to teach these capabilities, the data isn't that different. So our educators are actually not that confident in teaching these capabilities. And so the question that I kind of want to throw to you both is, we've talked a lot about why this stuff is really important for young people. We've talked a lot about, hey, it's not that much more work for the teacher, but maybe the conversation that we haven't yet is how do we build the confidence of our educators to do this well? Because at the moment, a lot of their professional learning is in standing at the front of the room and being this disseminator of content, this content expert, which is fantastic. But how do we teach teachers to teach these capabilities so that our young people can build these strong portfolios and self-awareness? Because that's a critical part. If you don't have confident educators, you can't have compelling opportunities for young people. So Pip, I'll throw to you first. What does it look like from a capacity building point of view for teachers? What's best practice when it comes to supporting educators?
So do you know what your learner profile is? Have we ever done our learner profiles as teachers? Do we know where our magic powers are? So our world as educators is always about learning, and I believe if you're not curious, then maybe it's time to have a little hard chat to yourself as an educator. So when we're curious and we know where our strengths are and we know how to learn, then we grow. So when our professional learning process mirrors what we expect of our students in terms of learner profiles, I believe that's one way to help us understand the power of them, and then get some confidence to understand who we can tap into a masterclass. So if I know someone in my school is great at problem solving, then maybe I can go and work with them to help me lead activities in my classroom. If I know someone who's a great collaborator and is able to teach that well, I'm going to go and work with those. So ironically, it comes down to collaboration in that aspect, I guess. But what I'm saying is that we have to become the learners as well, and we have to know where our jaggedness and our magic powers lie in order to allow that process to happen in our classroom, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. And I think there's a couple of reflections that I had there. I remember getting my teaching degree, right? And when you're a prac student, every door is open to you. Like you can wander in and out of any classroom and you're like, oh, I'm just learning. And like, you know, every classroom. And so I loved walking into, I was a senior English teacher and I did HPE because I wanted to be able to wear sports gear to school. So it was like a free pass to show up in t-shirt, like a polo shirt and shorts rather than have to wear heels. So that was a very strategic decision by me to marry those two subjects together. But as a pre-service teacher, I could walk into maths and science classrooms, I could walk into the arts classrooms and I could sit and I could learn. And I felt like I picked up so many tools. And yet suddenly when you graduate and you get your teaching degree, it's like all the doors close at the same time and we miss the opportunity for that collaborative learning, which I think is really interesting. And then that second thing is once our educators have awareness around what they're confident in and potentially what they're not confident in, there's 2 layers of accountability there. The first layer is if you're a leader, you need to support the learner. in your school community. But the second thing is, if you're a learner, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if we're asking our young people to get comfortable being uncomfortable, then you have to put yourself in that learner position and also get comfortable being uncomfortable and trying to build up this capability. Hassan, I'll throw to you, like, what does this capacity building piece look like for educators? Because I wouldn't say that teachers are confident in these skills and capabilities.
Yeah, so the challenge for us has been traditionally the way we're seen as a curriculum assessment authority is to provide professional learning on the content and the curriculum and the assessment. And what we've often found in terms of what we fall short is the intended curriculum and then the real curriculum. And so we develop a great curriculum and we design it the way we intended to have the impact that we hope. But because you've got a broad diversity of teachers and context, that it plays out in very different ways. So what we've just started shifting our focus and trialing is, rather than focusing our professional learning program on the content and the details in the curriculum, we've started focusing on professional learning on the key big pedagogical ideas that we think will have the most impact to delivering that change. So you can interpret the learning requirements and the performance standards, and that's still important. We've got measures and ways to do that, but all our energies, our face-to-face energies and our resources are focused on what are the big pedagogical ideas that are going to most allow me to have the impact and the intent of that curriculum. So I'm not sure, some of you might know in South Australia, we have 2 compulsory subjects, which is the research project and the personal learning plan. We've just transformed them totally and flipped them on their head, and we've called them Exploring Identities and Futures, which we start in our senior secondary journey, where they start to understand who they are and who they want to be, not their career. It's more about themselves and where they want to go. So you get to start to explore your capabilities. And then second one is activating your identities and futures, which is saying, now I can focus on something that I'm really passionate about and really explore what I'm good at. And so in those 2 subjects, we're framing this idea that the most important pedagogical practice that's going to best support student agency and capability are these ways. So now our big 4 are student agency, feedback that supports self-regulation, metacognition, and natural evidence of learning. And that's all our PD is focused on that. And we want to support teachers across those subjects to do those. But what we're signaling to the other subjects is this is something that's coming to a subject near you very soon. So these are the underlying, capabilities and pedagogical practice that are supporting the foundational success of all subjects, and that we want to start with EIF, AIF, but we're going to let you know that we're going to come to other discipline areas pretty soon. So that's the way we're trying to do that, move away from providing PD on subject-specific content to pedagogical ideas.
Love that shift. Super conscious of time. I don't know about you, but 40 minutes has flown. I thought we still had 15. It's actually not true. We've got about 3 minutes. So if anybody has any fast questions they want to drop in, I will actually make Hassan and Pip answer them in 60 seconds or less. So if you've got a super fast question that hasn't been answered, we will do some real fast shooting responses back on that. So feel free to kind of drop those in. The last question that I want to sort of finish with before, if there's any others that come through, is if you're an educator that's listening either live to this conversation or re-watches this recording later, and maybe you're at the beginning of your journey. So this is something that you know is important. You've drunk the Kool-Aid, but you're not really sure where to start. What would you advocate? Maybe it's reading or a podcast, or maybe it's even a process, something tangible you can do within your classroom with your learners. What would you do first? And Pip, maybe I'll start with you.
For me, I would go to the Australian Curriculum General Capabilities, and I would pick one strand, one element within, and have a look at your existing program and see where that fits in. Don't change a thing, just fit the capability into what you're already doing and talk to the students about that. Start opening that conversation around capabilities with students.
Awesome, thanks Pip. Hassan, what about you? Where do you start?
Like I said, you've probably seen a range of documents going on, but the one that resonated probably most with me most recently is actually Learning Creates paper by Michael Stevenson. I'll add it to the chat, but it's Education for Human Flourishing. And for me, it's sort of saying refocusing on the purpose of education. the SACE board has been quite explicit in trying to frame the idea that education isn't a competition. And they've got to make sure that if we actually focus on everybody supporting young people to learn and progress, then that's our purpose. And so that idea of human flourishing and sort of shifting the idea of the current meritocracy that's in our system is a real good driver for us, and how that rather you can do that in your classroom, but also you can contribute to a system solution as well. So that's a really exciting one for me.
Awesome. Pip, back to you for Jody. Good to see you, Jody. How long did it take for you to fully implement the program into your school? And also what kind of staff load was on this project to kind of build the infrastructure that's set around it?
So there's probably, we kept the team to small, about 3 people working on this. And we have started it with, so we are currently, it's a 900 student school, and we're currently about to roll it out to about 200 students across 7 to 12 as our next layer of a pilot. So start small and then get bigger each iteration. And by the end of this year, we want every student in year 12 to have their profile as they leave.
Awesome. Thank you. If I could give one thing for teachers to start with in the room as a closer, I would start with how can you get your students to benchmark their capabilities so that they have some awareness of their confidence. And so we'll send through some questions with this that we use to help students self-assess how confident they feel on the skills that sit underneath some of these capabilities. Because if your young people have an awareness of where they sit on the continuum of not so great through to great, then they've actually got the intelligence then to action that knowledge, which means you as the educator, you're not the keeper of the progress. The young person is the keeper of their own learning and progress, which I think is a really key part, Pip, that you spoke to before, is that if we want student agency, we have to have student ownership. I think that's really critical of the data here. To close, can I say a huge thank you to Pip and Hassan? I know that I could have nerded out for another 45 minutes. I feel like that flew very quickly. So there could be an opportunity for us to maybe continue the conversation later in the year and kind of dive deeper in this. So on behalf of Future Anything, and obviously Jen and the rest of the team and all of the 40 something educators that jumped in today and the other 100 or so that were registered that are just hanging to watch this with a glass of wine in their own time, thank you for carving out 45 minutes of your time to be present and share your experiences and your knowledge and everything else along the way, and answer some of my really tough questions that I needed to push at the edges of too. So thank you. And our next live learning session, which is very exciting, we'll send out the information so you can register for the next one. But I think what's really interesting is part of today's conversation has really been around asking schools to rethink the way that they've always done things, right? So we've had this system and this process that served us through the last 4 industrial revolutions to varying degrees of success. And now we're at this critical juncture in humanity where we need to assess if the way that we're doing school is actually serving, to go back to what you said, Hassan, the greater purpose of why education exists. And so our next live learning session is actually going to be with author Chris Shipley and potentially Heather McGowan to actually unpack their new book, The Empathy Advantage. So really looking at maybe putting into some of the practical frameworks and thinking required for schools to move past what they're doing right now. So we would love for you to join us for that one, and we can nerd out on another 45 minutes of jam on this as well. So thank you. We will have to close the poll on whether it's a sausage sandwich or a sausage sizzle to be continued for the conversation later. You know, really important points that we've unpacked here. But from us to you, thank you for your time and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks.